This is Canon Fodder, episode 33, live again from England. This week we are discussing the first novel in what is called the post-apocalyptic genre. And my guest this week is an artist. He is a movie maker. He is dissident right businessman, Mr. John Cinder. John, how are we doing?
I'm doing excellent, man. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk about The Day of the Triffids by John Wyndham, published in 1951.
And before we get into the book, I wanted to, get into your background a little bit because you have, I'd say, a small Twitter imprint, but it's very deep, and you seem to have a lot of friends and mutuals. And I guess I just wanted to, pick your brain about that, and how did you get to know so many influential people in our spheres?
I can't really trace it back to like when I think I first joined. If you guys know Jeff McNukes from the Asian Capitalists, he was doing. I mean, the name says it all, right? They're like
Mm-hmm.
he was a Canadian guy who was talking about the loony left, but kind of in the time when Trump was rising to prominence. And I got into a Discord with a bunch of people, and it was as any DR Discord is, it's a nut house. But I don't know. I just met a lot of people, and I come from a business where it's all about meeting people and having conversations more so. Well, I guess that's what everybody does, so that sounds stupid, but relationships are more interesting to me, maybe than like follower counts. I know everybody wants a bigger follower count, more influence, further reach, and I'm into that. But I just find my time spent, especially on Twitter, just in the DMs and in spaces. So just getting to know people, and then with my skill set, which is like writing and video editing and sound editing, music, stuff like that. Anything that goes into like the filmmaking process, I've had a hand in. Uh, Loaning those services out for other people's projects has afforded me some opportunities to move in some bigger circles, which is fun. I mean, I enjoy the relationships more than anything. So
Now, I consider myself a decently well-read guy, although every episode of this show kind of shows me that I'm not, because most of the time it's a book I've either not read or not heard of. And I wrote my first novel. It was post-apocalyptic, right? And
mhm.
without even knowing it, I was borrowing tropes that were established by this book. So, how did you get into Wyndham? How did you discover this novel before we kind of get into the nuts and bolts of it?
So when I was a kid, I was really into BBC radio plays,
Mm,
and this they did it basically an audiobook of this. It wasn't dramatized, a little bit of music, but I heard it first on the radio, and spent years trying to dig it up, and I finally got my hand on the MP3, and then I finally got my hands on a copy of the novel. So every year or so, I will read it again, and that was probably like 2003.
wow.
So I was a kid, and it just always struck me as this interesting, deep look at what what the world would look like after a an event like this, in a way that like I don't see it in Hollywood, right? I don't see it even in some of the shit hits the fan. Oh, do we swear on this thing?
Yeah, no, you're good.
And that genre, that shit hits the fan genre, post-apocalyptic genre, like it had a level of introspection and a deft of use of prose that I just found so attractive. I loved the writing style, and I just love how he went into the repercussions. And he didn't go too deep, but he went into the repercussions of this thing and having to rebuild society, and the effects that it has on people in a way that I hadn't read before.
The most striking thing to me about this novel was that he diagnosed just how cucked England was after World War II and would become in the future. Just how dependent we're talking about a nation that had conquered the whole world. And in the span of 40 years, is now looking to one of its descendants across the ocean to solve all of its problems.
And at the time of this recording, is this? Oh yeah, you. I thought you were going to talk about Rishi Sunak, but but you're talking about the United States, yeah, and especially in
Sorry,
that.
yeah, no, not that side of the pond. I'm talking about the United States, but actually, and we'll get into the immigration allegory of this novel as well, because it's pretty obvious, and Wyndham doesn't pull his punches,
Well,
but
and that's the beauty of good fiction, is you can kind of use it as an ability to interpret. Because I would make the argument that like the Triffids is like this creeping socialism that makes all men equal, and the blindness is what happens when you look up, when you look at the distraction of modern life, of fill in the blank, you become blind to the true enemy.
and I'm glad you brought up the Triffids because it's in the title, right? And you don't actually learn about them until chapter 2, which I think was a good choice on Wyndham's part. But what is a Triffid, John?
So Triffid is a genetically engineered carnivorous plant that can preambulate. They have been designed to be able to pull up their roots and move. So they can scramble around, they can dig their roots back in and take up a post, but they can walk. And they have a long, like, stinger system that is lodged in the cup, similar to like any number of these acidic plants, that lashes out 4 to 5 feet and is able to strike an individual and poison them, so that then they die. And the Triffid then digs its roots in and takes up and waits for the body to decompose, and then pulls strips of the flesh for nourishment.
Right. And throughout the novel, we there's this looming question of how intelligent are these creatures? And it's interesting that you say bio, or at least genetically engineered, because I think it's left up to interpretation. Uh, our protagonist Bill definitely thinks that they were engineered by the Soviets as a way to bring terror to the West, let's say, right? Or even as an experiment gone wrong, which is, it's interesting because this book predates Chernobyl by like 30 some odd years, you know? Uh, so it's interesting that Wyndham has that theory kind of going around his head.
Yeah,
Uh,
and it's not just the Triffids thing. You could say that they weren't even doing that as a weapon, but they were using that as like a way to circumvent industrial oils. So they're trying to create a plant wherein they could
right.
get oils that are usable for everything. And the real
Literal
question
seed
is,
oils.
yeah, the real question becomes, where did the green comets come from? Where did the
Right.
shooting stars come from?
Right. So, and to explain to the audience, Bill, our Bill Mason, our protagonist, he is in the hospital. He has had eye surgery because a Triffid stung. Basically, Triffid juice kind of got into his eyes. He was blinded for a little bit, uh, but because he has some natural immunity to them from some earlier experiences, and that the attack wasn't so bad, he is able to regain his sight through surgery and various medical practices. So you have, hold on one second. So these Triffids are, excuse me, I'm just going to cut this shit. So Bill wakes up in the hospital. He is surrounded by nurses at one point who are telling him that he is missing out on this amazing astronomical event. There are green lights in the sky, there are comets that are passing through Earth. Nobody can explain how they're being formed. It's apparently the greatest show in the history of man, right? The next day after this comet show, anybody who has watched the comets is now totally blind, right? So Bill escapes the hospital, or rather, just kind of leaves. He wasn't trapped there or anything, and realizes that although he's sort of lamenting the night before that he has missed this grand experience, he learns that actually that's what ends up saving his life.
Yeah, for some reason, watching that comet light show has caused the majority of Earth's population, presumably, to go blind.
And this book was written. It was published in 1951, so think it was written 1950, let's say. So beginning of the Cold War, satellites. I don't think Sputnik is or in orbit just yet, though. John, you can definitely fact check me there. It wasn't in orbit, at least when he was writing it, but the idea of satellites going around the Earth was definitely in vogue at the time. So in the novel, Bill, he's thinking that, oh, okay, uh, those comets that we saw last night were actually just a bunch of Soviet satellites that are that unleashed blindness or some sort of toxin down onto those who watched. So very very science fiction, very very Silver Age science fiction, definitely cool concept, but doesn't ever leave out the idea that it could just be an alien invasion, which I think is nice, without ever saying it, by the way.
Yeah, that's part of the reason I love the deftness of the prose, because he knows what to leave out without detracting everything from the overall story. And Sputnik was launched in 1957, by the way.
Okay, yeah,
which is even more interesting.
Right. So yes, so the idea, and you have to imagine, because this book was popular, I'm guessing, at the time of its release. So you got to think in 1957, people are like, oh, John Wyndham predicted this. Oh no, even though Sputnik was literally just a light, just blinking.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it was the green light that was blinking, was it? Do we know?
I think it was red.
Okay.
For the Soviet Union. So in chapter 2, we get a flashback. Bill is explaining his history with the Triffids, what they are, a kind of a retrospective. Because what you learn later is that this whole book, and we'll get into spoilers, but this whole book is a kind of an oral history of the fall and rise of civilization again. So very much in the vein of, say, a worse novel. But John, have you read World War Z? Very similar.
I liked it for some reasons, but definitely a worse novel.
As did I. That was one of the first books that I read in high school for fun, because I wasn't much of a reader then. But very similar thematically and stylistically, though obviously differing in quality. Right. So we get a background on these Triffids from Bill. He is a biologist. He comes to understand these things, and we actually get a character whose name escapes me right now. And John, please give me the name. But the whole time I was thinking, oh, this is Chris Sandbach.
What, his partner in the laboratory?
Yes, his lab partner.
Shoot, I was just thinking about him today. Walter Lucknor?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, this is Chris Sandbach. At least that's who immediately came to mind when I read this character. He's kind of aloof. He pays very close attention to the Triffids, and he actually comes up with the idea that these ambulatory plants have a more sinister one. They have a motive at all, but it is sinister.
Well, that they have an intelligence, and there's something I left out of my description, is they have these 3 stalks at the center of their bulb, of the stem, that tap. So they tap in different rhythms at different times. And Walter's theory is that that's a way of communication, which suggests intelligence. And obviously, it's not a very popular idea in the Triffid oil industry in which they both work, but it just seems like pretty natural, and that plays out more in the book too.
Definitely. So as we kind of move on, Bill is running around London trying to figure out what's going on. Everyone around him is blind. He sneaks into a pub. And one of the things that Wyndham does, John, that you mentioned before, is that he knows what to leave out, but he also knows how to punch you square in the gut. At least 4 children are either explicitly killed in this book or mentioned to be killed. This guy, he owns the bar. His family lives upstairs, and as soon as his wife figures out that they're all blind, she turns on the gas and takes a long nap with herself and her children. And the man in the bar, he's just drinking enough until he has enough courage to go and join them. So very very raw, very uh, yeah, raw is probably the best word, especially for the time period.
Yeah, were you gonna say evocative there,
A
and then
little bit, yeah.
decided against it?
I did decide against it,
Yeah,
but
no, it is, and that's one of my favorite things, and I think that's one of the reasons this book does so well and has stuck with me is his use of children. Like there's multiple mentions when he's moving through chapter 2 or chapter 3, which is the groping city, where he comes across children who can see, and they're surrounded by their parents who can't see, and they're usually like 4 years old. So they're trying to tell him what's in the store windows. They're trying to find food for him. There's a mention of a child that was too young to understand what the adults wanted from it. And that, like, the visual, the imagination, the images that you conjure up of that are heartbreaking, knowing that there's no future for these children. And that's not something I've seen in Shit Hits the Fan fiction recently.
the opening to so 2 works that are definitely based on this book. I'd say both of them zombie fiction. The Walking Dead as well as 28 Days Later, right? Both start with
Yep, and
men
those are
in
confirmed
hospitals.
to be directly inspired by Day of the Triffids.
Right. So these men wake up in hospitals. Jim, I think his name is played by Cillian Murphy in 28 Days Later. He wakes up in the hospital. He's been in a coma, and the world has gone to hell. The streets are completely empty, right? But it's it's almost too clean, right? And The Walking Dead is similarly clean.
Yeah, and it makes sense that it has to be clean just from like it's a film. One is a film and one is a series, so they have to get straight into the action, and it's a great setup, a great vehicle to move. But he really takes his time with this, which is nice. But it never drags. He's got great pacing in
Oh,
his
the no,
prose.
the pacing in this book is phenomenal. Uh, you're in and out of the hospital in a chapter, but you're there long enough to understand that. I mean, he's tripping over dead bodies left and right. People who have just fallen down the stairs because they suddenly can't see. He goes into one of the surgical wards and the intensive care wards, and all these men who have grievous wounds who aren't going to make it, and they're just asking for the blinds to be opened because they can't see anything in the ward, and somebody should have come by to take care of them, and Bill just has to leave because he knows that there's nothing he can do. One of the themes of this novel, I'd say, and we can go deeper into that in terms of our current political situation, is that you can't save everyone, and if you try, it will only kill you.
Yeah, that there's definitely a branching down the line of the old conventions having to die, and this desire to you just can't. you can't save everyone, and yeah, I don't want to go too far into that just yet, but gosh, it is. I'm always impacted when I go through the Groping City chapter specifically because it is so difficult.
So, Bill still has his let's say middle class sensibilities, maybe even upper class sensibilities, right? And he's walking around Piccadilly, and he sees one. There's a man who can see, who is leading the blind, and he gives to the blind men a woman, right? So Bill coming trying to come to this woman's defense, attacks him, and then is punched in the jaw for his troubles. And he thinks, okay, and this is his welcome to hell sort of moment, like welcome to the shit moment, where he's like, okay, I am not a knight in shining armor. I cannot save all the damsels. Everything he learns very quickly that everything is pretty fucked.
Yeah,
So,
and the idea is that they're pulling more than one woman. Like they're going to get drunk and they're stealing blind women to have their way with, and that's
and
going to be what happens going forward.
even he sort of rationalizes to himself. He's like, oh well, these women aren't going to be grabbed much longer. They're just going to willingly participate if it means another second of survival for themselves.
100%, and we know it's true too. That's another beauty of this book is those
Yes,
moments of truth.
John Wyndham is woke on the WQ.
100%.
So Bill meets a lovely young woman and tries to figure out where he's seen her before. It turns out that she wrote a sort of raunchy autobiography that brought a lot of shame to herself, which just a very interesting detail to her character. You know what I mean? Like it's
Oh, 100%. Well, she came from money, and her family wanted her to live a certain way. And when she didn't want to live that way, and she didn't want to date a guy that she wanted to date, they cut off her allowance. So to
so
compensate for that, she wrote this raunchy, piece of trash fiction that did really well, and that's how she got her money. That's how she survived.
yeah. Gisela, her name is Gisela. She's uh, a very well written character for a woman, especially men don't typically write women very well. There are some notable exceptions, chiefly probably Tolstoy in Anna Karenina, as well as certainly not Hemingway. But I'm sure there are examples. I just can't think of any off the top of my head. But Wyndham is definitely one of those men who can write a three-dimensional woman who ends up becoming, you know, very conservative kind of trad wife out of necessity, but at first is definitely not that.
Well, and I love it that it feels very natural, like
Mm-hmm.
her progression into that, right? It never feels like she's soapboxing. It always comes after a series of events that she is processed and then come to this conclusion, which I just, again, like the deftness of the prose for me just works so well.
So the two of them find in the middle of the night that there are other sighted, let's say, survivors who are all meeting up. Uh, I think at a university, right?
Yeah, yeah, they take over a university and they're marshaling as many sighted people as they can.
Yeah, so they have lights on at night so that anybody who sees it at night can clearly tell that there are other sighted people out there. And the man's name is Michael Beadley. He is, I'd say, pretty well adept at organization and leadership, and he puts down these rules for living in the society that he knows has to occur. The Probably the chief most rule amongst them is polygamy, polygamy must be instituted right away as a matter of course, just so there are enough children born to keep civilization going.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite chapters, and that chapter is conference. So they take stock of everything, they sort of figure out what's going on, and then they all sit down to institute the items. I marked it. I may be wrong, but this is from the book. There's Beadley speaking to everyone. He says, "Stupendous as this disaster is, there is, however, a margin of survival. It may be worth remembering just how we are not unique in looking upon vast calamity. Whatever myths that have grown up about it, there can be no doubt there is somewhere far back in history the Great Flood. Those who survived must have looked upon the disaster comparable in scale with this, and in some ways more formidable. They cannot have despaired. They must have begun again, and we can begin again." So that whole idea is having to build a new society
And
with these rules.
and Beadley, it's never mentioned how old he is. One gets the sense that he's probably in his 30s, maybe his early 40s, right? But he's clearly a more experienced man, and he has this spark of life, right? He has this will to rebuild that I think Wyndham is commenting on, that if, let's say, this event occurred before the Second World War, I think Wyndham's trying to say that it would be no question that British society could be rebuilt again fairly easily. But in this sort of post-war malaise, this sort of resting on the laurels of quote unquote victory, the average British man has lost his will to exert himself upon the world, and even inside his own borders.
Yeah, and there's another piece where they speak about, I'm not going to read it, I don't think, but where the elderly gentleman in the Beadley lot
The
caravan.
Colonel, right?
Yeah. Oh no, he was no. I think Beadley is the Colonel. No, Beadley's not the Colonel. Excuse me. Cut all that. It's the elderly gentleman who's an academic.
Oh, I see.
Who's the one that points out that the world that you knew is gone. The conditions which framed and taught us our standards have gone with it. Our needs now are different, and so our aims must be different. If you want an example, I would point out to you that we have spent all day indulging with perfect ease, with perfectly easy consciences in what 2 days ago would have been considered housebreaking and theft. With the old patterns broken, we have now to find out what mode of life is best suited to the new. We have not simply to start building again, we have to start thinking again, which is much more difficult and far more distasteful.
And of course, the the first objection and the first objector is a sort of proto Mary Whitehouse, sort of school marmish woman, very religious, named Miss Durant. She obviously objects to the polygamy on the grounds that she's a Christian, that she even makes the argument that the institution of marriage was established by God after the flood, and they were able to weather the flood just fine without having to resort to sin as a matter of policy. So we shouldn't be encouraging this. And I'm kind of sympathetic to the view that she espouses, because I am a Christian. But I find it funny that she's also just such a pill and so annoying.
Well, she equates what they're suggesting with the beatnik concept of free love.
Right.
Like
that's right. Yeah.
The proto hippie. It's like
Yeah.
she stands up and said, "Am I led to believe that you're advocating for free love, sir?"
She. Oh, I forget what her name is, but the actress who played McGonagall in the Harry Potter series, as well as the mother in Titanic. I think that's the same woman, right?
Okay, yeah, uh, did she play Wendy in Hook?
Yes.
Yeah, I forget
Yeah.
her name. I should know. She's a dame. We should know her name, dude.
Yes, and she wonderful actress. But just when the ship is going down, she asks, "Are we going to be? Are the lifeboats going to be arranged by class?" Which is like such a an American line, really. Like, I look back on that and I just kind of roll my eyes, but it's believable enough for the character, and that's who I kind of picture in this Mr. Rant role. Um, I don't know. It's easy. I've seen so many films that I can't appreciate novels for themselves anymore, which sucks. But
Yeah.
I kind of picture people as actors. Unfortunately, it's a bad habit, but it's not even a habit. It's like second nature at this point, which is unfortunate. But before they can even really start to build their own society or their society again, a man by the name of Coker, he infiltrates the university. He is also able to see, but he uh, starts a small fire that sows chaos with the group. Everybody splits off into their own directions, and Bill and Gisela are both after deciding that they're going to be wedded, and Gisela decides that not only she will only marry Bill if he takes two blind wives as well, which is an interesting dowry, let's say. So Coker starts the fire, and then he basically enslaves Bill to a blind person and a sort of blind cadre, leading them around, getting food and supplies, all while trying to get away from these Triffids. Interesting note about the Triffids as well. Bill right away is trying to tell Beadley, hey, we got to watch out for these Triffids. I have these anti-Triffid rifles that are super effective at curbing them. Beadley, he has no experience with these things, so he kind of thinks that Bill is insane, and a little, if not insane, a little mixed up in his priorities, let's say,
Yeah, and
which
and
is
they lived in London, so they didn't have the Triffids as often
right.
as in the people which is mentioned in the equatorial South, where they grow really fast and really wide.
But it's such a good detail to add that, of course, Bill, who has worked with these things and knows how dangerous they are, his credibility and his credentials go away with society. Suddenly it doesn't matter that he knows everything about Triffids, because the guy in charge knows nothing about them, so doesn't consider them a threat yet.
Yeah, and again, it's because they would dock their Triffids in the city. So when they put them in the gardens or have them in the solariums or whatever, they would cut out the sting, and the sting
Right.
would regrow in like 3 months. But
Yeah, so they would just they would they thought that by pruning them every month or so, they were mitigating any danger that they posed. Which, to be fair, and Walter points this out, because humans have sight, they're right. But as soon as the playing field is leveled, with the loss of sight, then suddenly the Triffids have this massive advantage. Um, so this is probably my favorite part of the book as well, is when Bill is the captive of this group of blind people. He's taking them around, trying to get them supplies, and one evening, when he's mulling over whether he should go, a beautiful 18-year-old girl comes to his bedroom in the middle of the night and is offering herself up in exchange for his staying and keeping them going. And you can tell that she doesn't want to be there, that she has been coerced or even forced by the rest of the blind who are there, who are like, yes, we will appeal to his fleshly desires, and give him this young woman in order that he will continue to provide for us. So in some ways, you could even see it as a tribe of villagers offering a sacrifice to their god.
Yeah, and this was all predicated on Coker's grandstanding that those who were sighted have a responsibility to take care of those who do not have sight. And so that was his idea. He was trying to get all these people, this throng of blind people, into Beadley's compound at the time, the university grounds. So this is the natural progression, the logical outcome of his policies in action, which is you've got this one guy overworked who then has to be given the flesh tax to keep him incentivized to help these people. Because if he doesn't have a desire coming out of himself, how is he going to help them? And I'm curious to know why that is your favorite part of the book.
I just thought I thought it was very powerful and very well done, because you see, not only does Bill dismiss it out of hand, but he's so remorseful that this young, beautiful woman has to resort to this. He's mourning her lost youth and innocence. And I just thought
in more than just one facet, right? Because
right.
It's not only like the virginity thing. It's
and to his credit, he rejects her, right?
Yeah, but it's also that she doesn't have a future anymore without him, and he knows that he not taking her virginity, presumably, is him essentially condemning her to death, because he knows he has to get away because people are dying left and right. And then shortly after this, the disease.
Yes, the unknown disease, which just only affects those who are already immobilized by blindness. So one could even say that this is kind of a protracted disease, the blindness being the first symptom, and then a slow, agonizing death afterwards.
Yeah, I always considered it was like, didn't they talk about it like being possibly cholera?
Yeah, I mean, he mentions that, we have to get out of the cities because all these dead bodies piling up, cholera is bound to outbreak, which, again, really, really smart on Wyndham's part. It also shows a level of just general knowledge that your average person kind of had about how the world works that is lost today completely.
It is so logistically sound without being autistic.
Right. He's not making, copious lists of everything that he has and everything that could go wrong. He just offhandedly mentions like, yes, all these dead bodies in the street, that means that they're going to be full of bacteria. Bacteria could be bad and could cause cholera, and it's all very logical. But when you read or you watch something made today, when we have this advantage of just complete, I almost say mastery over disease, at least at a mass scale, whereas something like COVID is the worst thing that we can kind of get on a mass scale in society, which is saying something, but like we don't, our fiction doesn't consider the second and third order effects of the loss of civilization the way that Wyndham kind of takes it for granted.
Yeah, I'm just caught up in imagining those streets. He did say something later in the book, though, that is relevant to right now, which is it was a kind of mercy that as many people became casualties as they did, which was something like over 99% of people. Because if 15% of people were left alive, it would be a much hairier situation.
Right. Not only are they competing over resources, not only are they competing with each other for, even just basic survival needs, but also just the rape and the pillaging and the lawlessness. A smaller population is easier to build up than something that is full of these warring factions.
Yeah, then the desperation. So that's like there's no war for those resources, meaning you have more time to sort of set your position and build something that will work instead of just competing the entire time, fighting the entire time.
And it's interesting that Coker, because I didn't put the two things together in my read. Uh, that Coker is this socialist.
Yeah, yeah. When they
He's
don't
he's
come out
this.
right out and say it,
No,
they
no,
just
definitely not. But like just the way that he talks and the things that he espouses and believes in, he's like this like yeah, he's a shitty commie,
100%.
and as soon as he needs everything to go exactly perfectly his way, and when it doesn't, oh well, it's time to destroy the thing that might kind of work, to destroy the good in order to get the perfect, and his perfect is literal slavery.
Yep, he's the Hebrew International Family Services. Isn't that what Mayorkas worked for?
I have no idea.
I tried to tie this into your immigration.
I mean, and we'll get to that part.
Okay, sorry.
Uh, so Bill eventually, and after Bill is offered this he's offered a virgin sacrifice, which he rejects. The next day, everybody succumbs to this disease, and the young woman who offered herself to him the night before, uh, even she succumbs to this or she's succumbing to the disease, and Bill actually just takes her out. And I think he gives her a combination of drugs so that she'll just kind of die,
Yep.
peacefully rather than suffering. Uh, just really, yeah. I mean, it just Wyndham does so much with very little, because this is a pretty short book, and we've
Yeah,
already
I
kind
think
of.
for my copy, which is a 1951 copy, it's 222 pages.
Yep, very lean prose, not a lot of fat, um, and you you get scenes where you are left contemplating, like, damn, if I were in this situation, I would be thinking just like Bill, or would I have the strength to do X or Y or Z? You know what I mean? Like,
Well, and I had a question for you. Like in that situation, you put yourself back on the rooftop at the university with your wife, and she's like, "Yeah, I'll only marry you if you take, two sensible blind girls as well." I mean, is that a sacrifice that you could make, TR?
I think I would, just for the sake of humanity. I
Oh, that's
think,
very humanitarian of you.
I'm a lover of mankind.
Is that shit? Well, where's that from?
I don't know.
Okay.
I've watched so much stuff in my life that sometimes I think I have original thoughts, and it's just a quote from a movie.
I feel like that's Zap Brannigan.
Maybe
That jumps out to me as
that
Zap
that
Brannigan.
that, that could that that's it's very Brannigarian. So, Bill is now searching for his wife. He escapes again. To use the word escapes makes you think that he's trapped somewhere, but really he's just like, the whole world is this giant prison that he's trapped in. He leaves the house of the dead in search of his wife, right? He
Yeah.
comes across a young girl named Susan.
Well, wait. That's way down. So what he leaves this house of death and he
Oh,
walks
right,
into
right,
the
right, right.
city of death and he's walking around the city. He goes to her district, what he thinks her district is in London, and starts looking around the places that she may have been. And he ends up finding a hotel he presumes they were staying at, and the disease also started taking them. So she gets away. So he has to return to the university. And by the time he gets there, it's completely deserted, and he comes back into contact with Coker.
Right. Yes, that's right. He and Coker are reconciled, right? Coker kind of learns the error of his ways somewhat. He's still like sort of a smarmy douche, but like
100% is.
The working class equivalent of a smarmy douche, because we learned about his background. He is a working class guy who kind of tried to pull himself up by his bootstraps, and he ingratiates himself with upper class society. And after a while, he thinks that they just keep him around to be like this dancing monkey, right?
Yeah, they're slumming. They're slumming.
Right.
Presumably, it's alluded that he's the bastard son of an aristocrat.
Right. But he tries to espouse, like, for all intents and purposes, we'll say Marx, right?
Yes.
He does so, let's say, in a Cockney lower class accent, definitely not posh, right? And he's kept around because it's fun for the well-to-do to hear these things from a real Britainer, like a man of the people, So he learns how to talk all educated, and he's able to easily slip in and out of characters as necessary. So like any communist, he is a subversive snake.
Yep, and that's how he came to miss the green shooting stars, is he was at a labor meeting that was broken up by the police, and he went to hide.
Yes, he hid in the basement, and he hid under like
some soft pillows or some shit.
Yeah, it's just very Wyndham is taking like that whole class to task. That whole like the quote unquote labor organizer to task.
Yep. So he fell into the pile of soft stuff, and he actually went to sleep and slept through it. He slept in long, good
slept
sleep.
through the apocalypse.
Right. So that's the only reason. So they meet up again, and they're able to sort of come to an accord and understanding.
Yeah, and Coker kind of says, I probably shouldn't have set the fire and put you into slavery. I'm sorry. Very, very kind of reluctantly, but also like he does that apology where you kind of, it's not really an apology and you justify it. It's like, I'm sorry I got caught kind of thing.
Yeah.
I'm sorry it didn't work out.
Right, exactly. I'm sorry you feel that way.
Yeah, but like Bill understands that Coker is at least useful, and Coker does become very useful towards the end. So
yeah, right. That conversation that they had, they do go over why Beadley was correct in the first place, and Coker is able to contribute to that conversation, which does suggest that this is a guy who gets it. He's malleable. He can change his opinion. He can see sense. He can see logic. So they decide that they're going to load up 2 unused lorries, which are semi-trucks essentially, like 3-ton.
Mine just says trucks.
Yeah.
My copy says trucks.
Really?
Yeah.
What copy do you have?
I got so Modern Library put out an edition. I actually found it at Barnes & Noble.
No way.
Yeah, they put it out not long ago, actually, probably.
Okay, that's interesting. And this was something I wanted to mention because I have a couple copies of this.
Yeah, 2022.
Wow.
Yeah, so very, very recent. Very cool.
I guess this is more popular. I just have never heard anyone else.
I think he's having a rebirth because at the store they had this. They had a bunch of his works actually.
Okay, yeah. So because he also did the Chrysalids, which is awesome, and he did the Midwich Cuckoos, which was the basis for Children of the Corn. And he did another one called Chalky, which is there's some influence in Artificial Intelligence, the movie, the
with the child and the teddy bear.
Yeah, so he has stuff like Chalky and Midwich Cuckoos are not as good. But Chrysalids and Day of the Triffids are excellent.
All right, I'll have to pick up Chrysalids, and then maybe we'll talk about that on our next meeting.
Yeah,
Although
that's
I
a
did
great
want to
book.
talk about Vonnegut with you, so we'll figure that
I
out. I'm sure.
I
I'm sure.
fucking love Vonnegut, dude. I was jumping up and down. I was listening to an episode where you're talking about Cat's Cradle. I love Vonnegut.
Yeah, so I'm sure this is all very interesting for the listener right now, but to hear about the logistics of Canon Fodder. Uh,
What does
but
your
anyway,
schedule look like on?
yeah. How about Tuesday the 38th?
I gotta check. Hold on a second. I'm gonna go look at my schedule. Yeah. So they get in a couple trucks.
Yes,
And
and they
load it up with
make their
stuff.
way to not Wyndham Hall, Tisham Hall,
Tisham
right?
Manor.
Tisham Manor. Yes, it's a
Dennis.
country estate ran by Mr. Rant, and it's like The Handmaid's Tale. I'm kidding. It's not like that at all. It's like it's to her credit, it is a half functional civilization, but her inflexibility and her honestly girl bossy bitchiness get in the way of any sort of progress that can be
Well, and
made.
anybody thinking outside the box, because then they go there, they see it, they walk in there, and it's like it's heavy. Again, this is another community that heavily favors the blind, right? So they've got 70% blind, 30% sighted. So the sighted people are all young girls, and they're all trying to keep this stuff up and running, and they spend their time doing all this stuff that they don't know how to do. So Coker comes in there, and he is immediately able to get the generators running because there was petroleum just sitting there evaporating in real time, and they just didn't think to do it. And there's an interesting conversation there where they talk about, like, if you don't have the desire to do this stuff, you're never going to found a new civilization. You need only think. And they just don't want to think. And I don't know where Wyndham stands on religion. It seems like he's kind of taking a shot at the
He
church.
is. I think he's more taking a shot at kind of this womanly version of Christianity,
Okay,
right?
yeah, I can see that.
At least a modern reading of it is definitely apparent, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if any, you know what? Yeah, I will say, because everybody seems to agree with Beadley that uh, the old ways, the shackles of these institutions have to be released in order for us to rebuild. So I will. He probably is not a big fan of the church. Um, but it's interesting that he decides that the best way to go against that is to put it in is to put it in the longhouse.
Yeah, that's 100% true. I know you mentioned that earlier too, and it is super relevant because he does go to a country estate, so it is something of a literal longhouse.
And and all the sighted people are women, and
Yep.
they're all like mini Florence Nightingales. You know, they're just their whole raison d'etre is to take care of these poor blind people. You know, they're doing it's almost like a nunnery.
Yeah, yeah, it's caretaking. Like they're not building anything; they're just sort of maintaining to the best of their ability, which is low.
Which I while we're here, um, we can talk about the parallels to today's society, right?
Right.
This book was written in 1951. The West had just won the World War II, right? The Cold War had just been kicked off. Uh, the standard of living, at least in the United States, jumps tenfold with all these people uh, able to buy houses, able to buy appliances, cars. The everything that people think about, like the nifty fifties. You know what I mean? And even in post-war England, there's a little bit of that, but Wyndham is pointing out that England has lost its balls, that the war had castrated the largest empire on earth, and there is no will to do anything except maintain and steadily decline into nothing. Like they will go quietly into the night, and Wyndham is shaming his countrymen for that.
Yeah, that's profound um, and apparent throughout the whole piece, but certainly with the reaction to Beadley's lot, because you have the socialist influence, the hyper religious influence, and the entire time we're just screaming to go with Beadley, even if we sort of reject the polygamy aspect.
Yeah, I mean Beadley. I'm gonna make a really crude analogy, but Beadley is like the right wing bodybuilder vitalist.
It's Bap. It's Bap, dude. It's
Yeah,
proto
no,
Bap.
Bap is a Wyndham fan confirmed. But and on the other side, you have the party of decline. You have the nursing home that is the modern West. We're going to keep you comfortable until you just go away.
Yeah.
And even the comfort isn't. They're even really bad at keeping you comfortable these days.
Yeah, because it's they're all DEI hires. They didn't
Which
know to put the petroleum in the generator to get the
which
lights on.
which way, Western man?
So it's
Uh,
all about Beadley's lot if you want to survive.
Triffid in nature does not move. What mean?
So yeah, that doesn't work out. They want to find the Beadley lot. They make that known to Miss Durant,
And
and
yeah,
she lies to
Durant.
them.
Yeah, she sends them south. Uh, Coker ends up going his own way, right? Uh, because he doesn't believe her.
Yeah, Coker wants to find Beadley's lot, and Bill Mason wants to find Gisela.
He just wants to find Gisela. Yeah. So where Coker has the acumen, because he was a professional liar, he can tell when somebody's lying and feeding him shit. Um, so he's like, all right, yeah, I'm gonna go off. You should come with me. Uh, Bill, because he loves this woman, because he believes uh, that Durant's morals are guiding her, that she wouldn't lie to him. He decides to go south, which leads him towards uh, parts unknown. Right? He finds a bunch of different groups who are all struggling. They all think that every time that he arrives somewhere, they assume that he is part of the cavalry that's coming to save them. Several times people are like, well, luckily the Americans will be here any day now. You know,
Yep. Adamant.
yeah, they are certain that America has their stuff together and they're going to come to their rescue just like they did during the Second World War. Very much like I wouldn't be surprised if he were taking direct quotes from Londoners during the Blitz for some of these parts.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to point out really quick that we made a mistake and that Coker and Bill don't part yet. They go
Oh,
with
sorry.
each other. No, that was my fault. I called that one out. They go with each other when they do meet this other small group of people. And that's when they start. So they base themselves with the radio guy. Anyway, they base themselves in this little village, and they start doing concentric circles, looking for the Beadley party and
That's right.
Gisela.
That's right. And they come across sometimes groups of two, sometimes groups of five, but no more than 10. Then they end up splitting up because Bill's going to go to Sussex because he remembers that Gisela knew people down there. Uh, Coker's going to go back to Tinsham because he has no better ideas and he feels like he could be of some use there. Uh, Bill finds a little girl named Susan who can see, and this might have been the saddest part of the book for me.
For me too, dude. I think about it all the time for a couple
Yeah.
different reasons, and we'll get into it. So go ahead.
So Susan hates Triffids. She's scared of them. she and her younger brother, I think Tommy,
Yep.
right, were left alone by their parents. First, her dad went out to go find provision for them. And after he didn't come back, the mother was taking care of them. Then one day she didn't come back. So this little girl who's maybe 5 is taking care of like a 3-year-old.
Yeah, she's 6. Not that that
Sorry,
makes much of a
sorry, she's
difference,
6,
but
and
yeah,
and
they're
she
alone.
yes, and she is trying to take care of like a 3-year-old. He is killed by a Triffid,
Because
and
he's still going outside to play.
yeah, because he doesn't know.
Right.
He's too young to understand, and plus the only person in his life is barely knows what's going on either.
Yeah, she goes when she goes out for provision, she gets cookies and candy for them to eat, which for me is just another thing that hits me.
Right,
So yeah,
because it's like, yeah, of course that's what I'm gonna get, the sweets that mommy and daddy don't let us have, you know, and this will sustain us. And Bill eventually he basically adopts Susan. He buries Tommy, and Susan has this like deep, unyielding hatred for Triffids. She becomes basically like the Triffids' worst nightmare. You know?
yep. She calls them the things.
Yeah.
And there's one moment that I want to point out, which really impacted me greatly. Is there's one night, the first night they spend together, they're in different rooms. She can hear her crying, so he goes in there to comfort her, and he says, "It's okay, you're safe. They're not gonna get you." And she's like, "It's not that. It was the loneliness of when Tommy died. Like I was alone, and I didn't have anybody that I knew. I was all alone, and that was the scariest part." And it's not written like that. I'm paraphrasing, but it's just so well written, and it's so real, right? For
Right.
those of the people that
Because again,
experience,
she's 6,
yeah. So,
and
and just to be on your own at like that. I mean, being being on
one,
your own when you're older is tough.
yeah, and just one, she at first had the responsibility of the whole world on her shoulders in trying to take care of her younger brother, but then losing him, losing her purpose in some ideas, and then having to try and figure out, well, what do I do now? And not having anybody to kind of be strong for or be weak against, but being just completely on your own. Yeah, for anybody that'd be crushing, but even more so for a young child.
Yeah. So yeah, that it is definitely the saddest part, but it again, it's one of these scenes where he's just skipping the rock between hard information and these incredible humanizing scenes, right? Events that he writes about, and that's one of them.
So they're traveling together, and eventually he finds Gisela. Bill finds Gisela, and it's a really tender, sweet part of the book because he's too busy like kissing and embracing her to introduce who is essentially their daughter.
Yeah, yeah,
You
it's
know,
funny, and
and
she's
Susan's like, "Who are you kissing?" You know, like,
why don't you kiss her indoors because it's
right.
raining at the time.
That's the line. Yeah, and it's just such a like such a innocent, sweet line, and it's such catharsis
Yeah,
for the scene that we just gotten, but it doesn't feel rushed and it feels very earned.
yeah, because they
Everything
go
in the
through.
book feels earned.
Yeah, that's an interesting point that you make. And again, I think just the pacing, it's the deftness of the prose. He's just did such a great job with this.
So
Um,
so they establish a colony, right? Uh, Actually, in Sussex, they're in the home of a blind man, and it's I think there's like maybe 8 of them, right?
yeah, it's a blind man and his wife, and she just had a baby, so it's or she's having a baby. It's two
Right,
blind people and then one other woman who's like a caretaker, like a midwife.
right, and uh, Bill and Gisela and Susan, actually, because Susan also has the gift of noticing. She quote unquote notices. She hates these things so much that she just learns everything about them. And whether when they create, they set up various defenses around the property, whether it's electrical fences, whether it's this, that, and the other thing. And Susan is constantly in a battle of wits against the hive mind that is the Triffids, right? Because they're just smart enough, and they're smart enough to use what numbers they have,
Yeah,
so
and that's
whatever tactics Bill or Gisela or Susan come up with, the Triffids are at first repulsed, but then come up with something else. So it's this constant fight that they're in, and
yeah,
they're
and
doing
she's
well.
noticing the adaptations that the things are making, right?
Right.
She's like she can make the intelligence argument better than anyone in this book because she sees how they react and how they change their tactics when they introduce a new form of defense.
So I think something like 5 years even pass, at least five, or
Yeah, it's
at
it's
most
something in
five.
that neighborhood. It's
Right.
between 2 and 5 because she gets
Uh,
older and the baby is born,
yes.
not blind, with the
Baby
abilities.
David. Baby David is born to Gisela and Bill, um, as well as the other guy, and his wife's kid is born as well,
Yep,
and he's born sighted, I think.
yep, he is.
So, um, any new humans that are born, and this gives them hope, right? That people are going to have sight again, which is great. Um, so we see Gisela just completely transform into happy housewife, right? Into trad wife, as despondent as she gets about the state of the world because she has a baby. She's able to get through it because she just has so much love for this child.
Yeah, Bill could fix her.
Bill fixed her. He turned a hoe into a housewife.
Yeah, and there's a
What's your
scene where they
excuse,
have
Incel? Where's your apocalypse?
this moment at the beach where they're talking about
Oh, they
like
go
I
on
wish.
holiday. That's right. Yes.
Yeah, they have this moment where Bill mentioned that despite everything that happened, I'm the happiest I've ever been.
Right. Right.
And she's like, me too. This is like, it was all for this. Like, we have this great life now in this apocalypse.
Really, all you need is a little bit of land
And,
and a
and an
family.
apocalypse. And for 99% of the world population to
The
die.
world would be a great place if everyone else would just die. Um, so they hear the helicopter above them. Uh, Susan burns their entire woodpile with a flamethrower to make sure that they're seen, which is really resourceful on her part.
Yeah.
Uh, and of course, it's one of the men from the Beadley group. His name is Ivan Simpson, which is very interesting. I don't. What is it about British people that they love taking Russian names? Ivan Simpson, and then you have like Boris Johnson. I not a whole lot of other examples come to mind, but it's something that I've heard is a thing.
Yeah, I don't understand anything British people do, so I'm the wrong guy to ask.
Right in it.
Right. In it. There is then. All right. So, do you want to do the rest of this episode in British accents?
Oh, I don't know about that, Gov.
Right. Right. Yeah. So
Quite.
she gets Ivan to land. They see him. They're able to meet them, and it turns out that Beadley's lot went through a whole thing, a bunch of
Yep.
different iterations of the community. Didn't work here. Didn't work there. But then they finally got a place that they liked, but it
Uh,
became overrun with Triffids. So it was like,
it was
be-
they landed on an island that was a Triffid plantation, and they're like, "Ah, this will be fine," and it was not fine.
Well, but then they realized, and Beadley was told, or told Ivan that if he finds Bill Mason, obviously bring him, but also apologize to him because he's the only one that saw
Yep.
the danger of the Triffids in the beginning.
Yep. So we get Beadley is he he's the opposite of Durant, of Mr. Durant, in that he is malleable, he is flexible, and he is willing to admit when he's wrong. He has all the qualities of a good leader that you would want in a crisis, right? He's decisive. He has a plan of what he wants to do, but he's not against amending that plan when new information arises.
100%. And it's because I mean, it happens to him where he has to change his plan multiple times. And that's how they end up on the Isle of Wight. Is it's defensible, and now all they have to do is clean out the Triffids once a year, right, in the spring when they take root, because they're airborne. It's airborne.
So, wow, and I'm thinking about this now. That shitty M. Night Shyamalan movie, The Happening, is like this book but worse.
I haven't seen
the
it.
plants are killing us.
Oh, so spoiler alert, guys. If you haven't seen The Happening yet, pause this and go see it.
The only thing
the
pause
plants,
is
right?
that movie.
The plants put out like spores or like
yeah, and it makes people kill themselves.
Oh, that's so.
And there's literally a scene where they run away from a gust of wind.
What was that one end of the world movie where they were running from the cold? Where like they did like that scare.
The day after tomorrow.
Yeah, and they had to shut the doors so the cold couldn't get in.
Yep. Like, well, okay. and funnily enough, that is based in part on The Quickening by Art Bell.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So Art Bell believed while he was living that global warming would create all these superstorms that would destroy society.
So interesting film.
It was an interesting film.
Well, done in the Art Bell style. Like I have just this imagination. Like I used to listen to Art Bell when he was on the air at night, and it was a very different time. So if you did it in like a '90s way, I think it would be really cool.
Yeah, I've only just recently discovered the genius of Art Bell. So I've been listening to Coast to Coast, basically the Art Bell tape vault. Really interesting. Highly recommended to people. Unfortunately, I've listened to too much, and now it's just like all samey.
Yeah, you do get to that point.
Yeah. So, so they plan to do a slow migration to the Isle of Wight. They don't want to leave their homestead because they've built a life there, but they know that their chances of survival are much greater. Gisela even has a line where she says, don't mind my silly womanliness when I start crying about leaving this place. I know, and I'm paraphrasing because again, Wyndham's a terrific prose writer. And she's like dismissing herself beforehand. She's like, I know I'm going to be distraught when we leave, but I know it's the right thing to do. So just ignore me. Really well done, in my opinion. Because I completely understand being attached to a place, but knowing that it's time to move on.
And then she had her son there too, right? Yeah. Like her life as a trad wife started there.
And I remember he even, I think, sorry, and this is like the last line of the book, right? But he says to her, "It's like, we're going to get it all back. Like, like you're going to be buried here, basically." So representatives from the government, quote unquote, show up to the homestead as they're sort of planning their move, and they congratulate them on being survivors and tell them that they are being rescued by having 20 blind people and their children put onto the land. Susan is to be taken away, and
she's going to be given her own feudal seigneury.
Yes,
she's
that's
going
right.
to be given her own 20 blind people. So it's the same approach as Coker, but this is a neo-reactionary monarchist
Yes. This
government.
is so. Curtis Yarvin knocks on the door and tells them after making them watch Hitler Lives, he tells them that feudalism is the only way to go, and that the blind need masters, and everybody who owns land will have one. They're going to have to do all the work because the blind people are functionally useless.
Well, not only are they going to have to do all the work, but they will use the blind as manpower work teams. So they were like, you're going to farm, and you're going to feed these people Triffid mash, and you're
That's
going to
right.
get them
Yep.
to work for you, and that's going to be your life. And Mason is like, so I'm going to be like a feudal lord, and he's like, well, eventually, yeah. And play your cards right, and
You know,
maybe you can get your own dukedom.
he's literally trying to sell him like a multi-level marketing scheme. It's like, well, then you get five blind people, and when they have children, right, they'll get five blind people,
Yep.
and you'll reap the benefits. And all you have to do is send us a few sighted people so that we can build an army to take over the world because
Right, and that's
everywhere
the
else is doing it.
Yep, that was the under the auspices of national defense because we don't know what our enemies abroad are doing, so we have to prepare. And it's like, buddy,
We have more pressing issues here. That like if Mr. Rant was too focused on the issues of right now, then Torrance is way too or Terrence or Torrance.
Torrance.
Then Torrance is way too focused on the issues of tomorrow. You know,
Yep.
and he's like honestly he's like a neocon psychopath. Um,
Well, and an interesting thing that we skipped over, but we'll bring up right now, is that this is not Torrance's first appearance in the book. He was actually cited by Bill Mason when he was looking for his wife, looking for Josella.
oh, that's right.
And
Yeah, and he took a shot at him.
yeah, he was murdering blind people in the street in London. And now the second time he's seen him, he's now in uniform and calling himself like a colonel or something.
That's right. So Torrance is obviously just like an opportunistic psycho.
Yep.
Uh,
What's your excuse, Incel?
you too could be a feudal lord of the blind, the retarded leading the blind.
Yeah, and and this essentially, they're like, okay, we obviously don't want to do this, so uh, Bill pulls his wife aside and says, okay, bring out all the good booze, get them drunk, and
Yeah,
I'll figure something out.
create a fine party for them. Uh, Bill even like goes into conversation, talking logistics, like trying. He explains to Giselle, he's like the this guy is the he will take care of problems right away sort of guy. He will just
Hmm.
shoot us and wipe his hands. Um, so Bill accepts and he tries to get it quote unquote assurances for Susan, even though again like he's not buying any of it, but he's just trying to sell it long enough that they can get him drunk, party all night, have him sleep in. Bill fills their gas tank with honey, which is just another just really useful, resourceful thing that modern people might not think of. The closest thing we'd have is, oh, let's steal their keys and hide them, you know, or
Yeah.
we'll just try and blow up their car. Um,
Yep. So
and
they end up having to leave in the night, and which they do.
they leave in the night. Bill promises Gisela that he will get all of this back for her, that they will return to this place, and they are able to escape to the Isle of Wight. And they allow the Triffids to invade the homestead so that they can take care of Torrance and his men.
Yeah, and that's where the story of Bill Mason and his people join up with the Isle of Wight. And so I kind of think that's a convenient. I'm not crazy about that ending. It works for me, but I do like that he said at the very end that his story ends, and this is where it joins with the rest of them, and you can find it all in the record of the colony.
Yep, yep. Because and again, that's just another. It's a a setup that is paid off because there's a woman. Her name is Elspeth Carey, which is a very British name. Um, she is taking pictures. She is documenting everything for the eventual history of the end of the world and the rebuilding of society. And you can tell right away that this group is going to make it because they are prioritizing the right things. They're prioritizing documenting what happened and how to move forward. They are adaptable. Yeah, really really good detail put in by Wyndham at the end there.
Yeah, and that's Day of the Triffids, and I love that story so
I do
much.
too. I'm a new Wyndham fan. Thank you for introducing it to me because
I'm
I'd
very
never heard of
excited.
it until you brought it to my attention.
Yeah, that's bizarre to me because it's been around since 51. But
Well,
I'm pumped that you agreed to do it, and I'm pumped that we're here talking about it.
so let's talk about immigrants.
Yeah.
A lot of smarter people than myself, so called, have noticed a pattern in Wyndham's writing, especially in this story, that he is that this book is an allegory for the unwashed horde of third worldists coming to England at the end of World War II. Right. Uh,
Absolutely.
we also see um, the rise of the nanny state in the form of the NHS, who is literally strangling the able-bodied for the benefit of the infirmed.
Yeah, no, and it will continue on. I don't know that there's a way out because all the innovators like Michael Beadley are like leaving, and I don't know where they're going. I would like to find them
Yeah,
and
yeah. No,
join
where's
them.
where's Club Tropical Excellent?
Um, I remember I broke my heel in London a few years ago, and I had to go to the emergency room, and I had a broken heel. I'm going into shock, and I'm in that waiting room for 6 hours.
Well, at least our schools ain't shooting galleries, isn't it?
In it, but I mean, it's fine, whatever. I mean, it was like a 3 month long ordeal. Um, and I had insurance too, traveler's insurance, but I still had to wait. They put a cast on it too, so I don't know if you know about a heel break, but like
I
a
don't.
cast doesn't
I've
really
I've
do
drank
anything.
enough milk in my life that I've never broken a bone.
Really?
Yep, I've drank a lot of milk.
What's the tallest fence you've ever jumped?
10 feet.
Okay, well, all right, maybe you got me. Maybe I just I was sleeping on that milk.
And
Um,
I was in the military. I had to climb over things and jump over things.
oh yeah, I was in dress shoes when I broke my heel, so I jumped a 10-foot fence in dress shoes
That's
to
a
climb home.
stupid. Why did you like rob someone?
No,
Were,
we just we
were
were
you
late
running
for
away from a highwayman?
we were late to the theater, bro. Like why else? And they had closed the main gate, so we had to get over. We had to catch a cab to get to the theater. Because I won't go into a theater if it's late, dude. You don't go to the theater late,
No, of course not. What are you, a
right?
heathen?
Yeah.
So yeah,
But yeah,
so
so unwashed masses, they're coming in, saddling. All it's gonna take is like the cataclysm, right? The green shooting stars for people. And
the
this
the
is
bread
now
in the
true for
circus.
right. This is now true for America as well. As we have all of a sudden we have 50 million new people who just don't like. I got neighbors who don't speak English, and that's not new, but like they don't speak any English, but they
They
live here.
speak they speak less English than the guys from 20 years ago.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, there's no communicating with them whatsoever. I speak a little Spanish, so I'm okay, but it's just wild to me. I don't know how you navigate. But anyway, the point is like when we get our Green Shooting Stars event, we will only then begin to understand why it's bad to import 50 million foreigners into your country at one time. So we're all Bill Mason out here getting our Triffid gear together, talking about we need to be careful about these immigrants. Like,
And we have plenty of cokers out there who are like, well, what are we going to do for this crying migrant child?
quite honestly, we just need to be working on our exit strategy, right? I mean, outside, because we don't have the. I don't want to get into this because we all know this conversation, but we don't have the institutional support.
No. So that's Day of the Triffids, and I mean, there's we could also talk about. Mm, I kind of don't want to. I don't want to imprint too much of my own thoughts onto it. Although there's plenty, I think a lot of it's supported by the text. Uh, Very good science fiction. Highly recommend. Probably the heir to Orwell, I'd say, in terms of British science fiction. I think that's fair.
Yeah, and he was criticized for being they called it middle class fiction or middle class science fiction, where it's like everybody's kind of having tea during the apocalypse, and
Yeah,
there's a little bit of that, but it works for me. It never
it
invades
works
me.
for me as well, and I think part of it is him that's part of his criticism is that yes, 100 year if this had happened in Victorian England, they would have time for tea during the apocalypse, and they would still be able to rebuild better than you lot now.
Yeah.
Like I think that that's part of his. I think he's angry about the state of his country in 1951. And I think that all the criticism that is levied against him in that regard only proves him right.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, he's certainly what one could dare say even call him based. Uh,
Made me cough.
he's I'm definitely going to pick up more of his work, and you should too. You should definitely pick up Day of the Triffids. There is a new paperback edition out in stores. You can even find it at the dreaded Barnes and Noble. Um, a
I got a first edition off of Thrift Books for like $8. That's how little respected this fiction is, which is so
uh,
bizarre to me.
so if you're a book collector like I am, maybe you should get a first edition for $8. Um, yeah, John, is there anything else that you want to mention before we get going?
No, that's it, dude. Thank you so much for taking the time and having the read, and I look forward to talking about the chrysalids next week, same time, same place, right?
Oh, I don't know about that. Uh, where can people find you? How can they support you?
I don't know how they can support me just yet, outside of just go to Twitter. I'm at Cinder Mountain, and we're working on a bunch of stuff, so none of it's worth talking about it right now. But when it comes out, you'll know.
As for me, you know where to find my stuff. Please support the Double Dealer. Please purchase issue 12 out right now. We are actually, by the time this episode airs, the acceptances, or rather the commissions for our partnership with White Boy Summer Apparel will have closed. So definitely pick up a copy of the Poolside Reader from WBS Apparel. Uh, WBS Apparel puts out terrific sunglasses. They put out tank tops. They put out the t-shirts. Uh,
Yeah,
Anybody
they
who's
got the good stuff, and I do believe that the poolside reader will be available as like a consolation or available as a complimentary copy for orders
yeah,
over a certain amount.
so make sure you pick up a pair of Glocks, the glasses of color. They're high quality stuff. I really enjoy them. Uh, they are a big proponent of this show and of the Double Dealer, and by supporting them, you are supporting us. I'm terrible at ending podcasts, so we'll just say insert ending here.